Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati Bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome poets Wren Spaulding, Teresa Scollon, and Keith Taylor to our At Home with Literati series this evening to read their poems. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees. The chat is closed this evening, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase books from tonight's readers throughout the event. Q&A, not Q&A. Live transcription is available to you on your toolbar should you need it using the CC icon on the bottom of your toolbar there. And if you're watching us later on our YouTube channel, there's always links to purchase books in the description directly below me, where you can also like and subscribe to our videos to make sure you're caught up with all of our At Home with Literati events once they become available at a later date on our channel. And we thank you for your subscriptions as well. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or Ann Arbor, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we would just like to thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon or much later this evening, depending on when and where in the world you may be joining us. So without further ado, I will introduce tonight's poets in the order that they will be reading. Keith Taylor has published many books over the years, collections of poetry, collection of very short stories, co-edited volumes of essays and fiction, and a volume of poetry translated from modern Greek. Teresa Scollon is a poet, essayist, editor, and educator. Her publications include the poetry collection Trees and Other Creatures from Alice Greene Co. I should mention that all of our poets have books out recently from Alice Greene Co., which is based in Ann Arbor, one of the independent presses we're so pleased to have right in our neighborhood. Her work is included in Poetry in Michigan in Poetry from New Issues Press, and Elemental, a 2018 anthology of essays about Michigan from Wayne State University Press. She's an National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, alumna and past writer-in-residence at Interlochen Arts Academy. She received a fellowship from Western Michigan University's Prague Summer Program and won the 2018 Moveen Prize in Poetry. And Wren Spaulding grew up on a rural homestead not far from Lake Michigan. Holly has lived and studied in Germany and Ireland, contributed to independent field projects in the Zapatista Autonomous Zone in Chiapas, and in communities struggle across South Africa and Lesotho. She founded Poetry Forge, where she hosts workshops and a manuscript incubator and works with writers from across the United States and Europe. An award-winning poet, Holly has been nominated for Pushcart Prizes and Best of the Net Awards, and her writing has appeared in Michigan Quarterly Review, Poetry Northwest, The Ecologist, and in Elemental, a collection of Michigan creative writing from Wayne State University Press. And We Are Everywhere, The Irresistible Rise of Global Anti-Capitalism from Verso. She lives on the southern seacoast of Maine. Please join me in welcoming Wren Spaulding, Teresa Scollon, and Keith Taylor into your living rooms.
Thanks, John. This is kind of fun to do. The three of us have connections that go back quite a ways. Holly worked with me at Shaman Drum Bookshop back in the early mid-90s when she was an undergraduate or just after undergraduate. That goes way back. I think all of us have been at the Bear River Writers Conference. Holly years ago was editor of the Dunes Review and published me, and Teresa is now editor of the Dunes Review and has published both of us. So, and there it is, the most recent issue, just out a couple months. So we have a history, and we've all. I don't know if the three of us have read before, but I've certainly read with both of them previously, so it's kind of fun. And we all share books from Alice Greene. Alice Greene has been around now for about 10 years, I think. They've done almost 20 books, so they're not feeling the need to become a major publisher. They want to publish the poetry they like in these beautiful little books that they do. They've done 4 of mine, which is kind of fun, and I thought I would read those tonight. Particularly because the first one that they did of mine, called The Ancient Murlet, was the first book publication party at Literati Bookshop, May 31st, 2013. We pushed this book, and I think they sold like 65 copies. That's better than my other books have done at publication parties at Literati, but they've all done fairly well. Some of these poems got reprinted in other books. Some of them have not been, but I thought I would read just a couple from this book, just to show you what things are like and what interested Jill Peake, the editor at Alice Greene, so long ago. So here's the first poem in this book, called Immigration Application Support Center. I should say, even though I've lived in the United States a long time, 45 of those years in Michigan, I am not an American citizen. So every 10 years, I've got to go and get my green card renewed, which is what this is about. Immigration Application Support Center. Some words, green card, rise from the chaos of Croatian and Chinese, from the wail of Russian babies, and resident alien from the Iraqi cab driver tutored by the Korean mother of three who helps him carve the strange shapes of this foreign alphabet onto his impenetrable forms. Writing the tiny language we, the stateless, share in this room without decoration or irony. None of us feels we belong. Stories I can tell you about that place. It's a fascinating other view of America. And this is sort of tied to it, a new language. Once you get past the poison ivy and cobwebs covering the door, once you find a way to push it open using a crowbar, then oiling the hinges, a hall stretches out ahead, clean, uncluttered, lined with unopened cabinets. There's a faint scent of lily of the valley in the air, or perhaps of lilac. This one I did reprint, and it got some play, but I like it so much that I'm going to read it again anyway. When the girl, if it's one of those poems where the title becomes the first line. When the girls arrived in Copenhagen and left the station near midnight, snow fell in soft piles on their hats and backpacks. No cars or people passed while they walked down the hushed streets. Through windows without blinds or curtains, they could see Danes bathed in blue television light, or quietly reading in uncluttered rooms, small novels perhaps, about two girls long ago walking through snow. And then I'm going to skip to the last poem of this little book, partly because I've just been thinking about my bloodroot blooming in the backyard right now, which is kind of fun. And then I ran across this poem as I was thinking about this evening, and it was like, oh yeah, our spring is late. You know, here we've got the bloodroot in March, and now it's the end of April, and the bloodroot is just over. But it's really a poem about despairing about writing poems in the hard months. Oh, I wish I could believe in February that the bloodroot will really bloom for its short moment until its petals will be knocked off by a cold rain in March, or that the cone flowers will turn to seed in September so the finches can pick them apart in one last frenzy of summer, or that the poem will come again, confident and supple in its moment on the page. Luckily, it's kept coming. I've made the right sacrifices, I guess, to make that happen. The next book they did of mine is a book called Fidelities, which they did in 2015. Probably about 3/4 or certainly over half of this book are prose pieces. I'm not going to read any of those tonight, just going to read a couple of poems. Ones that I don't get to read very often. Some of these have been reprinted though. Well, let me read this one. This is a poem that's an homage to Mike Kelly. Mike Kelly became very famous as a Los Angeles artist. He was sort of the center of a whole school of work in Los Angeles, but he was really from Westland, Michigan, and which is a sort of blue collar suburb of Detroit. And much of his work has those attitudes, including, even though, I mean, he lived to be close to 60, I think, before his death. And he would often intentionally do things that would be like adolescent boys would do, draw pictures of turds, that kind of thing. He did memory palaces, where he would try to recreate small sculptures of buildings that were important to him. And the places he couldn't remember, he left a blank. One of those places was his home in Westland. One was the art school a couple miles from me here in Ann Arbor. And one was his high school, John Glenn High School, which was the first, in 1980, the first gig I did as a visiting writer in schools was in his high school. He graduated about 4 years before that. So this has a little bit of that adolescent boy feel to it. I trust you will forgive me. John Glenn High School, Westland, Michigan, homage to Mike Kelly. My first gig as visiting writer, and they were excited too. Someone made blue flyers for the doors and windows. The poet is coming, the poet is coming. The day I arrived, someone else had tagged every one of them. In your mouth, in your mouth, in your mouth. You can delete that, John, if it's not right for YouTube. Well, here's one, a little Emily Dickinson poem, and I was thinking about the poem of hers about the winter afternoons, which is one of the great American poems of depression. And she sees that late sun. She too lived in the northern tier of North America. So she saw that late sun that comes in only for a couple of weeks a year, very low in the sky. I find it beautiful, and it doesn't work as a depression note for me. So I call this one Argument with Emily, Amber Afternoons. Sunlight in the back room, winter afternoons, slants into corners otherwise shaded. The dark weeks, solstice sun falling early, low all day across the yard. But the back room, these amber afternoons, riots in its yellow light. The poem, of course, has a lot of dashes in it. How could it not? The third little book of mine that Alice Greene did is called Ecstatic Destinations, which was a book of poems I did a little 1.5 mile walk I do in my neighborhood, triangular walk on the west side of Ann Arbor. And all of these poems were written outdoors on my walk. So that was my rule for writing this book. It all had to be on my triangle walk, and I had to write, or at least draft them all outdoors. They're still working in those days, so I still had to wait for the bus. January thaw. Even though it feels like spring, those of us who know too much huddle around the bus stop. We put our hoods up and hunch against the wind, our glassy bovine eyes half focused somewhere down the road. Chickadees, silly and inconsequential, let loose their mating calls in the bushes behind us. When the bus crests the hill, we shuffle to the curb and wait. And then the last poem of the book, which ends with the words that gave us our title, Ecstatic Destination. I did a poem in here about watching across the park, watching kids in the skateboard park. It was and they looked beautiful, and you couldn't hear the noises, you couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were moving like angels in that skateboard park. And I was thinking, isn't that nice? And then as I got down, as I put down my notebook, I looked down at the end of the bench where I was sitting on, and there were 2 used condoms. And I was thinking, oh man, him writing about the angels over there, and what do I have down here? And then I said to myself, because this is the kind of conversation I have with myself, Taylor, you got to get the condoms in the poem too, or it's not honest. So I did. Condoms abandoned on the park bench. I prefer to imagine the fucking here last night was fantastic. The perfect diamond to hold in memory as their world turns bleak. That night, last night, just a bit too cool to be naked outdoors, when they threw their heads back and whispered to the stars, while below them the cars on North Maple sped off to ecstatic destinations. And then the most recent one is called Let Them Be Left. I had in 2019, which you'll remember was just before the end of the world. I had my second appointment as artist in residence at Isle Royale National Park. Isle Royale National Park, for those of you who don't know, is the least visited national park in the lower 48 states. You have to work to get there, and you have to sleep in a tent when you are there. Gorgeous and wonderful place, unless you get an artist in residence appointment, because then they give you a little cabin way off by itself at the end of a point. They gave that to me, and I want to read the first poem I wrote. This is really a sequence of that time in 2019 that I spent there. Dune's Review with Teresa editing it published the first poem in this, and she probably doesn't remember this, but she made me cut out 3 words. And she was right. It took a couple hours to admit that, but she was right. So this is the version after Teresa Scollon has had her fingerprints on it. Waves. North Superior, after a warm day, a short sudden wind across the bay. Riffles on the water make long shadows, snakes of water, not yet waves. The lake looks confused in that good way, just before the dance begins. And I have done my time. So that's going to end there with Teresa Scollon's operation on my poem. Thank you very much. And, hold on to your seats. You're going to hear some wonderful work now.
Thank you, Keith. That was lovely. I'm sorry I don't remember making you take 3 words out of your poem, but that's a good reminder. Writing a poem is kind of an emotional experience, and editing is too, and being edited is even, is emotional too. Thank you. Thanks to everybody who's here. Thanks to Literati. It's a pleasure to be reading with these 2 poets whose close attention to things I really admire. And I think you can hear me, right? Can you guys? Yeah, you guys can hear me. Okay, good. So I had the pleasure of working with Alice Greene Company, and they make beautiful books. They're just gorgeous. And it was such a gift to work with editor Jill Peak and kind of think about what goes in, what doesn't go in. And I felt I was in good hands. So let's see. Your poem, Keith, reminded me of how the sun moves across the sky. So I think I'll start with Local Map of Loyalties. So the title of this book is Trees and Other Creatures. I increasingly feel that trees, I'm looking out at a white oak right now. They are beings, they are creatures. So that's what kind of tied this collection together. This is called Local Map of Loyalties. The Anishinaabeg is the name of the indigenous people who populated Michigan. So that appears in this poem. Petoskey stones, I think, should I assume people know what Petoskey stones are? I'm not sure. Yeah? Okay. Local Map of Loyalties. I've been pulling weeds in a strange allegiance to grass, but am training my eye to the others who live here. Sedum and moss, a pair of cardinals, crows, oaks old enough to have known another set of neighbors, the Anishinaabeg, wolves, deer. Digging new beds, I turn up gravel, Petoskey stones tattooed with the animals of ancient seas. The dog barks and my sympathies lie with the escaping squirrel, Otherwise, the dog has my heart forever. When a new bird arrives at the feeder, I drop everything to watch. Old orchids unfurl, natives of the forest floor. Next year, more. A young squirrel learns a route above, runs to the end of the white oak branch, considers a leap to the dying ash. In spring, a carpet of seedlings, oak and maple. Fungi congregate by kind. Wildflowers reseed where they like, where the bees can find them. The sun scores the sky, a different path each day. We all lean in its direction. I think Holly saw a baby version of that poem a long, long time ago. It took a while to kind of ripen. Let's see here. I actually want to read a new poem if we can. I'm not even sure what day we are in now of this Ukrainian suffering in this war, but it's on my mind all the time. So this is called Meanwhile. Meanwhile, bombs fall on Ukraine, shattering everything carefully made, frightening the animals, turning parents into cloaks over children. The old flee on the backs of younger men, picking their way across broken bridges. Once they sat in quiet houses. They gazed out polished windows at trees and birds, watched for spring. Outside my window, the white pine grows a foot every year. It was taken from the woods by a friend who saw it hemmed in and struggling. Now it grows fat and round. Once I found a baby robin deep in its branches, stashed there by a watchful parent while she foraged. We shelter each other. Where we are planted is pure chance after all. For all we know, the trees of Ukraine who have no shelter, who appear in photos halved, beheaded, scorched, and jagged, are crying out, their voices carried by westerly winds all the way round the world. For all I know, the trees I live under feel tremors through their toes in the earth, shudder for distant sisters. For all I know, their rising sap catches in their riverine throats. So let's see. I'm not sure what to say in between poems. I'm kind of a shy person, but Holly laughs. But I guess I should say, everything is connected. A long time ago, a wise teacher, Nick Bozanek, told me that everything's connected and the job of the poet is to make those visible. And I think about that a lot, actually. It's kind of with me always, that little piece of wisdom. And I might start out to write about Ukraine and I end up with trees, and I might start out talking about trees and I end up somewhere else entirely. So this one started out with grading papers at this table, actually, in this kitchen. And everybody showed up. All kinds of creatures showed up. On the eve of a remembered slaughter, the president is speaking in my kitchen. His voice is an intelligence, a steadiness of sound. I'm at the table grading papers. My little dog lays his nose on my knee, nudges it into my palm. He wants to be assured. It is evening. My clock beeps on the counter, and the young jay outside answers with its own alarm. Everyone on the radio has stopped talking to listen to the president. He is talking about Syria, saying, listen, we all must think this over if we will bring peace into the world. The dog takes my wrist in his teeth and pulls my hand down so I will pet him. Someone once told me I should never let a dog touch me with his mouth, but I have learned that a dog's mouth is his hand. I'm grading papers, writing comments to show I've read these young stories, turned them over in my hands, pressed a little at key spots. The dog retreats 3 feet and huffs at me, trying to speak. His huffing blooms into barking. The president is addressing the small part of the nation gathered in my kitchen. We are not far from each other. The dog shouts at me. The jay screams. How easy it is to answer alarm with alarm. All over the country, we are waking into the anniversary of the towers falling, that great cry, which was preceded by other myriad cries. We all are learning to listen. The dogs run outside for yard-to-yard dog gossip. They add their voices, stick out their chests, trot importantly around the yard's perimeter, then duck back in to nuzzle me. They love to stay close, no matter my clumsiness in their language. So I'm a Michigander, like the others gathered here. I grew up in the Thumb, which is a real place. We call it that, right? I got my student loans at Thumb National Bank. It's a real thing. And in that place, all the trees burned off in a huge fire in 1881. It was, I believe, the first aid operation of the American Red Cross, is to bring aid to the people who had jumped into wells and into creeks to survive this terrible fire. And as a result, I mean, there are trees there, but there's not the big old forests that you might find in other parts of the state. So that landscape has really influenced me quite a bit. And I think also, now that I live up north, I live up in Traverse City, the landscape here, I feel like it's always wondrous because it's not my original landscape. So up here, we had a terrible storm. Let's see, it was in 2015. It was like, boom, it just blew up, huge storm. It took down so many trees, hundreds, I'm going to say thousands. I'm not sure that that's actually true. You think thousands, Holly? Yeah, and it was incredible. And there were, piles of branches around for a long time. And I started to realize that we were grieving the trees, but there wasn't really a place to talk about that. And another poet I know, Karen Anderson, wrote a poem. And I thought, yep, that's right. There should be some poems about that. So this is called After the Storm. It was as if the earth had opened its lungs on the ground before us, a rainforest with its dimmed and radiant air, broken branches like wrecked cities, entire worlds of leaves still green and glossy, new acorns snug as young on an animal's back. The blued air filled with breathing. The people were still in their burrows of wood and plastic and glass. Lightning needled the distance. And the leaves, each individual set of crisp edges and generous green. It was as when a fish landed in the boat, all its tiny scales flashing while it gasps, is never more alive, is never more beautiful in its color and detail. And the branches flashed white in the darkness where they were torn. And for days, after the traffic had resumed, and the mourning dove had again taken up its unhurried notes, the leaves and branches of the trees, trimmed and piled chest high along the curb for disposal, kept living. So I think it might be time for, maybe something that has a little bit of humor in it, maybe a bad word. You're okay, you're in favor of that, right? Okay. Dung beetles. So dung beetles, if we had a Q&A, somebody would probably ask a question like, you know, how do you write a poem, right? Doesn't it seem like a pretty common question? And the answer is, I have no idea. Like, it just kind of, it's sort of this collage that happens in your brain and your body. You know, every little thing that you've picked up along the way might show up on the page, and you're kind of a vessel, really, through which all these experiences and things you notice sort of pass through, and they might turn into your poem. So I found this article about dung beetles. It's an African beetle, and they do indeed look for dung. That's their thing. And they, when they find a pile, they run in, grab what they want, and then they book out in a straight line as far away from their competitors as possible. And there's something very important about the straight line. And researchers have found that they navigate by the light of the Milky Way. And they tested this theory, and they wrote about it, and it appeared in Scientific American. And the cover of the magazine is this amazing picture of a dung beetle against this beautiful starry sky. And I had that thing around for a while before I was able to turn it into the poem. And here it is. I was moving furniture. I own a little rental house, and I was putting furniture in it so I could rent it out to summer visitors. And the poem came together. Dung beetles. Dung beetles navigate by starlight, hugging their wad, their stash, their futures, is not what I say to the men moving the couch, while I open and close doors around them as if I was evolved to do it. They, on the other hand, have got a strange modern shuffle. The sofas from Goodwill will give us ease until its season ends and it returns to Goodwill. In this way, the couch is dung, moving in circles. The house is just expensive access to ground, the right to plant flowers, name birds, watch stars through the empty winter branches. I couldn't take care of it alone. Good thing men are so generous with their muscles. Look at these boys carrying my shit. They look so natural. The dung beetles have been on my mind for a while, charting their courses by light of the Milky Way, a fact confirmed by fitting them with little paper hats to block their view of the sky. Without their guide, they move in tiring circles, getting nowhere. I empathize. I know the force of earthly imperative, the couch, the mortgage I wear like a hat, other worries that obscure the light. For beetles, single stars merely confuse, the whole galaxy is needed. How things fit together, that's what matters, like the miracle of roofs that hold weight over our heads while we sleep. Somebody figured that out and shared. Another wonder, how we sometimes help each other find the right road. Once my love drove us straight through the black night emptiness of Texas. He pulled over, we got out. He backed me up against him and held me close. Look, he said. We looked up. So I'm thinking maybe a turtle poem. And this is an old family story. The Snapper. In the long green days of summer, my grandfather caught a snapping turtle whose feet were as big as his hands. He stowed it in a heavy crock by the door, lidded with a thick plate and heavy stone, and went to bed dreaming of soup. In the morning, the crock was empty under its plate and stone. The turtle was gone. For all we know, it's living still, all weight and plate and cutting beak, trudging again the slick bottoms or lying under the mud in the pond, snaking its long neck up like a snorkel, caught by its relentless nature and freed also. Think of it encased in that ceramic tune, just another egg to break out of, maybe. the same scrabble up slippery slides, the same imperative. The weight of the lid on its back, moving backwards along the carapace, tipping as the turtle clambered up and out, clattering back into place over emptiness, while the turtle, who survived the dinosaurs, the meteorite, and the nuclear winter, my grandfather's dinner plans, that long moment when you're caught and held by the wicked and the bad, hope sealed off, when you are meant to only wait and tremble, the turtle worked its slow magic, move, move against the heavy dark. I think I'll close there. And welcome, Holly.
Thanks, Teresa. Thank you, Keith. It's nice to be with you. I picked flowers for you. These are for John as well. Thanks, John, for hosting us. Thanks, Literati. Or as Keith says, Literati. And I have always wondered, should I be saying Literati instead of Literati? I should know by now. I am a Michigan gal who now lives on the coast of Maine. However, at the moment, I am on the Leelanau Peninsula, and I am sitting in my dad's music room. So I'm glad to be with all of you, and I'm glad to be surrounded by Michigan during this occasion. I was inspired by Keith's pulling out poems from, earlier collections. And so I am going to do a little bit of that as well, even though I'll primarily read from my most recent release from Alice Greene Company's publication of my book, Between Us. So this came out in January, but I'm going to start with just a small poem from Pilgrim. And this is the first book that I did with Jill Peak. And I suppose it's the one that made all the other things possible. So I'm grateful that we did this together. This poem's called Belle, and I'm choosing it because it really comes out of the, Teresa was talking about it being an emotional event to make a poem or to edit a poem. And this is a poem that I wrote right after I had moved to the East Coast. So it was my first winter there, I think. And I was really feeling the absence of my friends and my family and my writing group that Teresa was in. I missed sitting around that table together. Belle. There's a church in town with a bell that rings every hour, and sure as anything, it reminds me of other cities I've called home, an iron ache over and over. It was poignant. It was really poignant. I was kind of surprised at how much I ached after that move. There was mention made of Dune's Review, and all of us have been affiliated in different ways. And I edited that for a while, and always was happy to see poems from Teresa and Keith show up. And this is a poem, and I don't remember who was editing when this was published in Dune's Review. But I wrote it when I learned that Fleta Brown, our friend, our treasure, Fleta Brown, was diagnosed with cancer. So this is now quite a while ago. And it was based on a dream. It's called Another World. So this is from the new collection, Between Us. Her wig was silky, so I forgot about the clumps of hair, bare scalp, and ritual shaving. We ignored the facts to saunter through a French department store, 7 floors to ask her how I should live. She fingered the red fabric of a fitted jacket Joan of Arc might have worn. Burn-proof, I said, holding it to her thin shoulders. It was a mercy to gaze at fine clothes like relics from another world we no longer believed in. Later, we visited the bookstalls along the slow-moving Seine, inhaling the smells of old paper, November air. Light glanced off a spire to touch her skin. So this collection was, I wrote almost all of the remaining poems in this collection during 2020. And you'll feel that, I think, in the few that I'll read from this. You know, I was at home, I was missing friends, I was a little bit more melancholy than usual, I would say. And this poem is for my friend Stephen Matheny, who died in 2019. And he was a good friend of mine when I lived in Ireland, and this is a memory of our time together. Elegy. The sky is flat gray today, and I am weary after weeks of worry, like everyone else on earth. But red tulips brighten the ledge where I keep a black and white photograph from the summer Stephen died. He still looked himself even a few days before the end. Some things will never make sense, but there was that time he cooked for me in his flat in Dolphin's barn, a feast of rice and beans, and we danced to Manu Chao in the cluttered kitchen, then wandered the city where it was always raining. Here's an epistolary poem dedicated to my friend Sejal Shah. So a lot of these, I was always kind of thinking about particular people during that year. And maybe I always am, but I ended up writing a lot of poems sort of as a way of connecting and reaching out to them. So this one's for Sejal. It's called Letter. There is not enough space to say how clean the air felt at the green market this morning. How sweet the smallest blue grapes, the color of fog. Or to tell you about the smell of basil, bread, thyme, and marigolds large enough to make a whole room glow for just $5. On the outer edge, a man with a chessboard and giant hands called out to me and waved, but I don't know how to play. It would have been nice to sit across from him and move my queen as though I knew what I was doing. If you were here, we would claim one of the benches and watch the beautiful mothers buying eggs and milk from upstate. We would sit close and feel the steam arising from our coffee in paper cups that say, I heart New York. Here's one for my friend, the late, great novelist, Brad Watson, who died in 2020. Missive After Death. The bardo lasts 49 days, Buddhists say, to allow the transition from this to that, which means we still have a little while left to pass our messages back and forth. As is customary, I have put out bowls of water, sacrificial cakes, flowers, incense, and candles. I will watch the wicks burn down. I will stay here until you are gone. And like Teresa, I have been troubled and bereft about what to do, as one always is, I think, when there's a war happening anywhere in the world. And so here's a brand new poem, unpublished, that I'd like to read, and it's called Still Life. It was not yet apricot season, and the trees still held their sweets within cold limbs. No buds, only a pink promise hinted at the tips. It was the season of air raid sirens, cluster bombs, sleeping underground. Not enough trains. Even so, a person sometimes imagines a bowl of fruit in a sun-filled apartment where so recently there was no war. And I think I'll just close with a poem from this book, Familiars. This was published in 2020. We've all been working away, haven't we? Writing our poems, publishing our poems, worrying about things, worrying about the trees, worrying about war, thinking about flowers, birds, friends. And this one came out in 2020. And I want to just read this one poem because I feel like it's the season to maybe have an encounter like this when you go outside. At the moment, it happens to be snowing, but any day now, this could happen. So the poem is called Beech, and here I'm talking about the beech tree. The path ahead is a ribbon of earth, lit by afternoon sun. Branches drape down. A traveler reaches out, bare wrist, leather glove, to stroke the oncoming green as if softly in love. Thank you for listening. Thank you for hosting. Just always such a treat to be with both of you, Keith and Teresa, and John too.
Thank you all. I mentioned to these poets before we went live that my favorite events at the bookstore are our events with, as Holly calls them, our Michigan affiliated poets. And it's so incredible that Alice Greene and Company has these three fine poets in their repertoire. And you just saw why these are my favorite events. So thank you, Keith, Teresa, and Holly for your incredible reading. And thank you to all of our viewers for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great evening all. Stay warm.